There's a quiet that settles into your bones when you realize you're only welcome because they didn't want the neighbors asking questions. Not because they missed you, not because they wanted you there, but because it would have looked bad if you didn't show up. That's the kind of quiet I carried with me into the dining room that Thanksgiving. And then my mother looked across the table at me, her knife halfway through the turkey breast, and said, "We just feel closer to Jacob's kids. They take after us more. Yours, not so much." She said it like she was noting the weather, like she was offering some neutral observation about clouds or gravy texture, not like she'd just drawn a line through my children's names. The worst part, no one flinched. Jacob kept pouring his Pinot Noir. His wife laughed like it was charming. My dad, half deaf and fully disengaged, reached for the stuffing like he hadn't even heard it. But he had. I saw the flicker in his brow, the way his hand slowed just a second too long over the bowl. I sat still. Not because I agreed, not because I was composed, but because if I moved, I would have shattered. My husband's hand found mine beneath the table. He didn't squeeze, just rested there. A presence, a question. My daughter. Ellie, only 9, with the softest eyes and the most foolish hope, looked up from her paper plate. She hadn't eaten a bite. Her green beans were cold. Why did Grandma say that? She whispered. Did we do something wrong? I wanted to say no. I wanted to lie. Again. To give them one more layer of bubble wrap, one more soft pad against this family's cruelty. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just shook my head and said, "You didn't do anything." Ellie stared down at her lap. My other 2 kids sat rigid beside her, not speaking, not eating. They'd stopped asking for love years ago. They'd learned. And still. It stung. I looked across the table, at the boys in monogrammed sweaters, their names piped onto cupcakes, at my brother, beaming as my mother refilled his wine and whispered something into his wife's ear, at the gilded frame on the mantel that held only photos of their family, not one of mine, not even the old ones. "I guess they just don't love us the same," Ellie said under her breath. That's when I felt it, a shift. Something turning beneath my ribs, not fire. Not grief. Just weight. Like gravity had suddenly remembered I was here. I reached for my purse. Slowly, inside, folded 3 times, was a letter, yellowed, faintly creased. It had my name written in my father's handwriting back when it was still steady, when he still had a voice. I hadn't planned to open it. Not tonight, but sometimes. The moment chooses you. I slid the envelope into my lap, and just then, as my mother lifted her glass to toast to family and the future, Ellie said, "Is that why we're not family? Because we don't act like you?" The fork my brother was holding fell, the table stilled. My mother blinked once, slowly, then said, "Excuse me." Ellie didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the silence that followed was louder than anything else said that night. I looked down at the letter in my lap. It was time. There's a quiet that settles into your bones when you realize you're only welcome, because they didn't want the neighbors asking questions. Not because they missed you, not because they wanted you there, but because it would have looked bad if you didn't show up. That's the kind of quiet I carried with me into the dining room that Thanksgiving. And then my mother looked across the table at me, her knife halfway through the turkey breast, and said, "We just feel closer to Jacob's kids. They take after us more. Yours, not so much." She said it like she was noting the weather, like she was offering some neutral observation about clouds or gravy texture, not like she'd just drawn a line through my children's names. The worst part, no one flinched. Jacob kept pouring his Pinot Noir. His wife laughed like it was charming. My dad, half deaf and fully disengaged, reached for the stuffing like he hadn't even heard it. But he had. I saw the flicker in his brow, the way his hand slowed just a second too long over the bowl. I sat still, not because I agreed, not because I was composed, but because if I moved, I would have shattered. My husband's hand found mine beneath the table. He didn't squeeze, just rested there. A presence. A question. My daughter, Ellie, only 9, with the softest eyes and the most foolish hope, looked up from her paper plate. She hadn't eaten a bite. Her green beans were cold. Why did Grandma say that? She whispered. Did we do something wrong? I wanted to say no. I wanted to lie, again. To give them one more layer of bubble wrap, one more soft pad against this family's cruelty. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just shook my head and said, You didn't do anything. Ellie stared down at her lap. My other 2 kids sat rigid beside her, not speaking, not eating. They'd stopped asking for love years ago. They'd learned. And still. It stung. I looked across the table, at the boys in monogrammed sweaters, their names piped onto cupcakes, at my brother, beaming as my mother refilled his wine and whispered something into his wife's ear, at the gilded frame on the mantel that held only photos of their family, not one of mine, not even the old ones. I guess they just don't love us the same, Ellie said under her breath. That's when I felt it. A shift. Something turning beneath my ribs, not fire, not grief. Just weight. Like gravity had suddenly remembered I was here. I reached for my purse, slowly, inside, folded 3 times, was a letter, yellowed, faintly creased. It had my name written in my father's handwriting back when it was still steady, when he still had a voice. I hadn't planned to open it. Not tonight. But sometimes. The moment chooses you. I slid the envelope into my lap, and just then, as my mother lifted her glass to toast to family and the future, Ellie said, Is that why we're not family? Because we don't act like you. The fork my brother was holding fell. The table stilled. My mother blinked once, slowly, then said, Excuse me. Ellie didn't answer. She didn't have to, because the silence that followed was louder than anything else said that night. I looked down at the letter in my lap. It was time. There's a kind of pain that doesn't show up in tears or screams. It lives under the skin, settles into your bones. It teaches you how to smile while shrinking, how to laugh just enough to pass as fine. I knew that kind of pain too well. I'd learned it from years of silence, of watching Jacob receive praise for the same things I was punished for, of hearing my own name turned into a warning, a cautionary tale, don't end up like her. But this night, it wasn't silent anymore. After Ellie's question, Is that why we're not family? A quiet fell over the table, the kind that hummed behind the ears, the kind that meant someone had finally said the thing no one else dared to. Jacob recovered first. He chuckled, like she'd made a silly joke. Kids. Huh, he said to no one, in particular. Reaching for the wine, my mother didn't laugh. She leaned forward instead, her eyes narrowing. Children repeat what they hear. She said, I hope you're careful with what you say at home. My husband tensed beside me. I could feel the heat rising through his skin. But I reached for his hand under the table. Not yet. Only later did I realize she didn't say Ellie was wrong, just that Ellie must have heard it from me. And that was worse. Dinner limped on. Forced conversation. Hollow toasts. A cake with Jacob's kids' names written in frosting, no mention of my children's birthdays, which had passed only weeks earlier. Then the slideshow started, a yearly tradition. Family photos, year by year, set to music, Jacob and his boys, beach trips and piano recitals, my parents in matching sweaters, barbecues I hadn't even known happened. We weren't in a single one, not even the old ones, not even when I was a child. They had gone back and erased me, my middle daughter, the quiet one. The thinker stood up and left the table without a word. I saw her shoulders trembling as she walked toward the garage door. No one followed her. No one asked, except Ellie. She slipped out a minute later, glancing back at me as she went, as if asking permission to escape. I nodded. She deserved better than this room. That's when Jacob stood up, glass in hand. He tapped a spoon against it. The room fell obediently quiet. "I just want to say how grateful I am," he began. "Grateful to be part of a family that values loyalty. That knows what real family looks like. Some people drift, some people leave, but we stayed. And that's why our kids," he gestured to his sons, "they get to reap the reward of that." I didn't breathe. He continued. "Dad always said legacy matters more than apologies. And I think we've honored that. The worst part, no one looked confused, no one flinched. Not even my father's sister. Who knew what Jacob had done with the company funds? Not even my cousin, who'd once told me privately she missed me at Christmas. They were all complicit in this rewriting. And then my mother, as if to stamp it in, added, "It's true. Not everyone is meant to be part of every chapter. Some people write themselves out." It was a rehearsed line. It landed like a slap. My hands were shaking now, not from anger, from restraint, because in my purse, still resting beside my untouched plate, was the letter, the one my father wrote before he died, the one that named everything they were trying to bury. The lawyer had sent it to me months ago. I hadn't opened it right away. I hadn't needed to. I already knew what he felt, deep down. But something in me, maybe grief, maybe guilt, had told me to wait. And now, I knew why. The room fell back into laughter. Someone poured more wine. The music shifted into something upbeat. But I wasn't in that room anymore. I was in the silence between my daughter's question and my mother's deflection. I was in the space between the erased photographs and the truth no one dared speak. And finally, I stood up, not loud, not dramatic, just upright. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, even the ones pretending not to look. Jacob smirked. Going somewhere, I smiled back. Not yet. I reached into my purse and placed the envelope gently on the table. It was cream-colored, a little wrinkled. His handwriting across the front, to my daughter, who never needed to ask for what was already hers. My mother's face drained of color. Jacob's hand froze midair. I didn't say a word. I just slid it across the table, between the wine glasses and the serving spoons, until it landed in front of them. "This belonged to him," I said, and he asked me to deliver it when the time was right. A pause. Then Ellie re-entered the room, quietly, like she already knew what was happening. She took her seat beside me. My older daughter returned too, pale but calm. And I looked at my family. My family, and realized something had shifted, not in them. In me, the fear was gone. The waiting was over. What came next wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was truth. And it was already unfolding. It's funny how a room can hold so much noise, and then go completely still. The moment I placed the envelope on the table, it was like someone pressed pause. Even the background music from the Bluetooth speaker faded into irrelevance. My mother didn't move. My brother blinked once, then twice, as if trying to recalibrate the scene. Jacob's wife reached for his arm, she knew. Maybe not what was inside the envelope, but she recognized the look on my face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't desperation. It was final. The kind of look someone wears when they're done playing by someone else's rules. "It's a letter," I said quietly. "From Dad." That alone shifted the air. He asked his lawyer to hold on to it until I was ready. I figured since we're all here, pretending to care about legacy, I might as well read it. My mother opened her mouth, maybe to stop me, maybe to spin. But it was Ellie, my 9-year-old Ellie, who spoke first. "Can I read it, Mom?" Her voice was clear, steady, no shame. Just curiosity. And something else, ownership. Because even before a single word was spoken aloud, She already knew this was hers too. I handed her the letter. She unfolded it with both hands, smoothed out the creases, and stood. Her voice was small at first, but the room was silent enough to hold it. If you're reading this, then either I found my courage too late, or you found this too soon. I owe you more than a letter, but it's what I have left. I watched you walk away and let the silence do the talking, because it was easier. Not kinder, just easier. You didn't leave the family left you. Someone gasped. Not dramatic, just startled. Like hearing something they never thought would be said out loud. Ellie paused. My mother stiffened. She still hadn't looked at her. Ellie kept going. I know what your mother told the others. That you made bad choices. That you were reckless. That you brought shame. The truth is, you showed more strength at 22 than I ever had in my life. You chose love. They chose image. Jacob shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him. I set up a trust. For the granddaughter you brought into this world without asking for approval. The one you raised without conditions. I made it so she'd never need to beg for a place at any table. Her name isn't in the family records, but it's in my will, in ink. Permanent. Ellie's voice grew stronger, steadier. To the rest of the family, if they're hearing this, know that what you praised in one child, you punished in another. You gave Jacob the pedestal, and her the silence. I let it happen. But I won't let the truth stay buried with me. When she finished, she folded the letter again. Not with ceremony, just care, and laid it gently on the center of the table. No one spoke. Even the twins, Jacob's boys, looked down at their plates like they wanted to disappear into the cranberry sauce. My aunt, the only one who ever sent me a birthday card in secret, whispered, "Oh my God," Jacob tried to chuckle, but it came out brittle. So what? You got a letter. It's just words. I finally looked at him. No. Jacob. You had words. Dad left proof. He frowned. What proof? I pulled a second envelope from my bag. This one thicker, stamped. Legal. Ellie looked at it, then back at me like she already knew what it meant. Because she did. I slid the second envelope across the table, letting it land right beside the empty serving platter. The room, still caught in the tailwind of the letter Ellie had just read, watched that envelope like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. It's from Dad's estate attorney. I said softly, certified, witnessed, filed and logged before his last hospital stay. My brother stared at it like it might bite. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling with a layer of control she couldn't quite maintain. You brought a lawyer into Thanksgiving dinner. I didn't blink. No. Dad did. He just happens to be arriving now, right on cue. The doorbell rang. It was like a scene out of a movie. Everyone froze. My husband stood, walked to the door, and returned with a man in a navy wool coat, briefcase in hand, graying at the temples, calm, quiet, professional. He didn't speak to anyone else, just to me, Ms. Hartley. He nodded. Do you want me to read the declaration now? I nodded once. Jacob made a scoffing sound. This is ridiculous. But the lawyer had already opened the file. This document, he said, is a formal addendum to the will and trust of the late Robert Hartley. It outlines specific amendments made shortly before his passing, regarding beneficiaries and the disposition of certain funds. My mother whispered. He said there were no changes. The lawyer continued. Unfazed. The primary change pertains to the education trust originally earmarked for the children of Jacob Hartley. Due to documented misuse of family funds and misrepresentation of the trust purpose, Mr. Hartley reassigned full control of this account along with its remaining balance and authority over scholarship disbursement to... He paused. To Eleanor Joy Hartley, date of birth June 12, 2013. Legal guardian Ms. Anna Hartley. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was dead weight, the kind that lands on everyone's chest at once. Jacob was the first to react, but it wasn't rage, Not yet. It was confusion, like he couldn't compute what had just been said. That's a mistake. He said, that trust was for my kids. The lawyer didn't even look at him. It was until your father found out it was being used to finance personal travel and undisclosed renovations on a property in Colorado. Jacob turned beet red. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked at me like she was trying to find a version of me that would still stay quiet. Still bow her head. Still ask to be forgiven. But that version of me had left years ago. You knew. I said to her, you knew what Jacob was doing. You helped him. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for her water glass. I didn't want the family torn apart, she muttered. I was protecting what your father built. I leaned forward just slightly. No. You were protecting Jacob. She didn't deny it. And that more than anything was the final confirmation. The lawyer packed up his folder. Unless anyone wishes to contest. I'll be filing this with the county clerk next week. No one moved. Not even the cousins who had always nodded politely and then changed the subject when I came up. They couldn't now. Because everything they built the story around who was good, who was bad, who was worthy had just collapsed. And then Ellie, my sweet, sharp, unsinkable daughter, looked up and asked a question with more grace than I'd have ever managed. Does this mean I get to choose who goes to college? The lawyer smiled. Yes. You'll have a financial advisor, of course, but the disbursement decisions are yours. Jacob stood up so fast his chair screeched backward. You can't be serious, he hissed. She's 9. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. 9. And named in a legally binding document your father signed, in full mental capacity. Jacob turned to me. What the hell kind of game are you playing? I stood too. This time, no game. I said, just the truth. Something you never had the guts to face. And then I added, quieter. Dad saw her, even when you all refused to. Ellie leaned into me, resting her head against my side. For a moment, I thought someone would try to speak, apologize, blame stress or confusion or old wounds. But no one did. They sat in their own silence, the kind that doesn't end when the noise comes back. Because this time, they weren't just uncomfortable. They were exposed. It didn't happen all at once. The lawyer left first, quietly, without drama. He nodded at me, then at Ellie with a small smile that said, good job, kid, and walked out into the cold November night like nothing remarkable had occurred, but inside that dining room, nothing was the same. Jacob didn't speak. For someone who'd never let a moment go unnarrated, his silence was deafening. He just stood there, frozen between rage and confusion, unsure which one would save him. His wife leaned away from him. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it clear whatever storm was coming next, she wouldn't be standing too close. And my mother, she didn't move at all. Her hand rested on the rim of her wine glass like she'd forgotten she was still holding it. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't flicker. Not even when Ellie reached for my hand and said, "Can we go now?" We didn't leave right away. I wanted them to see us walk out slowly. I gathered our coats, helped Ellie into hers, called my other two from the hallway, where they'd been waiting not because I told them to, but because they already knew when something wasn't theirs anymore. And as I stood at the door, I turned back one last time. No speech. No, I told you so. Just one sentence. He didn't choose sides. He chose truth. Then I left. And the moment that front door clicked shut behind us, that's when it began. The unraveling. It started with Jacob. 3 days after Thanksgiving, he got a call from the firm's oversight committee. Turns out, when you misuse a family trust tied to a registered foundation, there are consequences. He tried to spin it, said the lawyer was lying, that Dad had been confused, that the documents were fake, but the account numbers matched. The transactions were traceable. And worse, one of the properties purchased with that money, it had been flipped and sold for personal profit. The IRS didn't love that. His position at the company, a role he'd once bragged about being destiny, not merit, was transitioned. His office was emptied in less than a week. They didn't even let him clear his own inbox. I didn't gloat. But when I got the formal notice that the trust account was now in my daughter's name, with me as custodian until she turned 18, I sat down in the kitchen, poured a cup of tea, and cried. Not because we won, but because after all those years of being told we didn't belong, we had proof we did. My mother didn't call, not the next week, not the one after. But word spreads fast in families, even when they pretend you're not in them. I heard from a cousin, the same one who'd once asked if I was still raising that little girl alone, that my mother stopped hosting her Sunday bridge games, that she started canceling dinner invites, that she wasn't feeling up to guests, because it's hard to face people when they all know you were the one who taught your daughter shame. While your husband left behind a document drenched in dignity, people didn't confront her. They just stopped offering her the last word in every conversation. Stopped acting like her version was gospel. The silence around her grew louder than the one she used to punish me with. And eventually, it became clear she'd built a kingdom where she was the queen. But no one wanted to live there anymore. About a month later, I got a letter. It wasn't handwritten, not like my father's. It was printed, neat, cold, from my mother. No salutation, no apology. Just, I hope you're satisfied. You've turned everyone against us. I don't know what you hope to accomplish. I didn't respond, because she still didn't get it. It wasn't about turning people against her. It was about stopping the lie that she got to decide who mattered and who didn't. Who counted as family and who didn't belong at the table. That lie had lived in our family for decades, and it ended the night a little girl read her grandfather's letter aloud. Jacob tried to rebuild. He sent emails to former colleagues, tried to clarify the misunderstanding. He even launched a small consulting service out of his basement. But no one really bit. The people who once toasted his every success didn't return his calls. You can get away with a lot, especially in family businesses. But using money meant for education to fund luxury escapes, then being publicly stripped of it by your own father, in writing, that sticks. Worse, it follows. His boys. The Golden Twins. They stopped being invited to the same prep-level summer programs. Not because anyone blamed them, but because that shine their parents had polished for years had dulled. They weren't seen the same way anymore. That's what happens when a story shifts. People begin to remember things they ignored. People start to question the parts they once clapped for. We didn't seek revenge. We didn't show up again. Didn't rub salt. Didn't reclaim a seat. We just moved on. My kids started asking fewer questions. Not because they forgot, but because they stopped needing to understand why they were unloved. They knew now that they weren't the ones lacking. That knowledge, it's more powerful than any inheritance. That Christmas. We didn't send a card, we didn't hang one. Either. We made our own tradition. Hot chocolate. Cheap lights. And each kid picked one neighbor to surprise with a handmade gift. Ellie picked the elderly woman next door who always brought her dog to the edge of the driveway but never crossed over. She made her a scarf with mismatched yarn and a crooked smile stitched into one corner. That woman cried when she got it and whispered to me, "You've raised a good one." I smiled, not because I needed the validation, but because for the first time, it came without conditions. My mother sent one more letter months later, shorter this time. You made your choice. I hope it was worth it, this time. I did respond. I wrote on a blank white card. With nothing but 4 words, he made it for me. Then I folded it, sealed it, and never heard from her again. That was enough. Not revenge, not applause, not a redo of the past. Just peace. The kind that comes when you realize the people who couldn't love you right were never your finish line. They were just the starting gate you eventually outran. And looking back, that door closing behind us wasn't the end. It was the start of something I didn't know we were allowed to have. A life unmeasured by someone else's definition of worth. And now that we had it, we weren't going back. The mornings are quiet now, not the hollow kind of quiet, not the silence that used to settle in after a slammed door or a swallowed insult. This quiet is soft, honest. It lives in the way sunlight spills through the kitchen window and lands right on the cracked blue mug. I never stopped using, the one Ellie painted at summer camp with the words, "You belong with me." No one calls at 6 a.m. to ask me to pick up a nephew, or lend money, or explain why I wasn't at someone's birthday. No one guilt trips me for saying no. There's space now, room to breathe, to wake up slowly, to let the dog out, to make coffee just the way I like it, black, strong, no sugar. Sometimes I sit at the dining table and think about how long I tried to fit into a version of family that required me to shrink, to apologize for my very presence. I used to think healing would look like being invited back in. Now I know. Healing is realizing I don't need the invitation. Ellie's trust is growing, not just the one in her name, the one managed by a team of advisors. Steady and safe and exactly what she deserves. But the other kind of trust, the kind that shows in the way she carries herself. She doesn't whisper anymore when she talks about her grandpa. She tells her friends. He wrote me a letter, said I was enough. Her drawings changed too. Less castles, more trees, houses with wide windows, families holding hands, no one smaller than the rest. One day she came home from school with a little journal and asked if she could start writing her own letters to truth. I asked what she meant, she said. You said the truth sets you free. Right. So, I'm gonna make sure I never forget mine. I kissed her forehead and told her I was proud. But really, I was in awe, because she had found what took me 40 years to learn, that worth is not something you earn from others. It's something you remember in yourself. We moved last spring. Not far. Just enough to feel like we'd closed the door behind us gently, without slamming, but without regret. The new place is smaller, cozy. There's a maple tree outside the kitchen window in the mornings. The sun filters through its branches and throws gold all over the floor. On good days, Ellie lies there with the dog, pretending she's a cat napping in the light. On better days, I lie there with her. We planted hydrangeas in the yard. I let her pick the colors she chose, blue and white. Like winter sky and honesty, they're growing fast. I think we are too. Not everyone will understand why I walked away. Some people still think loyalty means staying, no matter how much it costs you. But I've learned something else. Loyalty to yourself, to your peace, your children. Your future, that's not betrayal. That's survival. And once you choose it, the rest unfolds. Not quickly, not perfectly, but honestly. If you've ever sat at a table and felt invisible, if you've ever heard someone say your children didn't belong, if you've ever walked away from people who shared your blood but not your heart, let me tell you something. You didn't leave the family. You left the lie. And you don't have to go back. So, wherever you are, maybe you're sitting alone with your coffee. Maybe you're still trying to find your voice. Maybe your name never made it onto the list. You still matter. You still belong. Let this be the letter you never got. Let this be the hand reaching across the table, saying you don't have to earn your place. You already have it. And if this story touched something in you, leave a comment. Say your name. Say what they never let you say. Or send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because the truth, it's not just mine. It's ours. And it's time we started telling it out loud.